Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and we're streaming live at those times. And we're podcasting on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher Player, FM, Blueberry, many other locations on the internet. We hope that you will go there and you will find some very interesting things. I hope you'll subscribe as well. And we also are on YouTube. That's right, we're on YouTube, where you can find out more about our guest. You can watch these interviews. We hope you'll subscribe. Believe it or not, folks, we're up to 104 subscribers on YouTube, but on the SoundCloud platform, with all of the outlets, we're over 93,600 listens. Now, bear in mind, folks, that is going back to January of 2018, but I understand that's still a heck of an amount. I've only got but little over 6,000 listens to go to hit 100,000. So that'll be an interesting milestone. But as I've said many times before, I don't do these programs for the numbers. I do these programs because the information is so important. And the information that we're going to share with you today is coming from a returning guest. He's been with us a few times. Andy Schmookler is our guest. And Andy, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your giving us a time every so often to talk about some of these subjects that are near and dear to your heart, especially when it comes to the work that you're doing surrounding a better human story. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, it's one of those times where I feel grateful to you because I'm a man on a mission. And I'm grateful to you to give me the opportunity to try to get some people among your listeners to help me fulfill my mission, which is to get certain ideas out into the world. Absolutely.
Well, that's what this program is all about. There are as many ideas as there are people, but then you can multiply that times the number of ideas they might have. 8 billion plus. A matter of fact, I was watching that little clock, Andy. I was watching it back in December of 2022, and we were ticking away, and all of the sudden we hit 8 billion. 8 billion human. I can't even fathom. I can't even wrap my brain around that number.
It is a big number, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, if you think about it's like if you think that 1,000 people seems like a lot, and then you get 1,000 different groups of 1,000 people, you're up to 1 million. And then you multiply that by 1,000, you've got 1 billion, and we've got 8 billion, which is a lot of animals on a planet. I heard recently that the biomass of cattle and humans exceeds the total biomass of all the wildlife on the planet.
Well, I'll tell you, it's still astounding. I mean, I don't care how you look at it, it is still an amazing thing.
What does that mean to you?
Well, I'll tell you
that feels important.
What it means to me is this. This has to do with the future of our civilization, whether we're going to continue on or not. As far as the attitudes among many, and you can figure out whatever number you want with this, who do not believe that relationships should be between any other people, any other sexes than between a male and a female. And I remember having a conversation with a rabbi. I love those conversations, I must tell you, where he says, that law in Leviticus about that Christians like to bash, same-sex people over the head with, where it says men don't lay with men, women with women, and so on and so forth. Do you know why? Do you know the context? I said, no, I don't. And he explained it to me. He says, basically, they put that law in there so as not to interfere with the procreative process of man. Now, my understanding from the historical records, as good as they might be or bad, that maybe around the year 0, okay, just roughly 2,100 years ago, I'm guessing here. Maybe the population of the planet was, I don't know what, maybe a million? Maybe.
No, I think we might be able to talk about a couple 100 million.
Okay, a couple 100 million. All right. A couple
But
100 million.
where are,
Here's where I'm going.
okay.
As I've already stated, and you have acknowledged, we are at 8 billion. So explain to me how the human race has interfered with the procreative process of,
Well,
you know.
I'm going to leave the same sex part
Sure.
aside.
That's fine.
We're talking at a scale of things here that in
Yeah,
which that's one rather small piece of a multiple set of issues in human civilization.
right.
But what I would say is I define civilization as those societies created by a creature that has taken the unprecedented step in the history of life of extricating itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically. Nothing had ever done that before. And we did it by inventing our own way of life.
Mm-hmm.
We started to grow some of the plants that we used to gather, like other animals did,
Mm-hmm.
gathering what nature spontaneously provided. We started to take some of the animals we used to hunt and put them in pens and breed our livestock. No other creature had. We had left the natural order, and we became a new kind of life form, one which has not been shaped by the process of natural selection, which had gone on for 3.5 billion years,
Yeah.
but that was shaped out of the imagination, the creative imagination of the creature itself.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds great. And indeed, it has had big payoffs, like we completely dominate the planet.
Yeah.
Because we were released from the place in which we had been put when we were hunter-gatherers, living kind of essentially continuous with what our primate ancestors had been. Small bands living off what nature's, they're egalitarian. We've seen it, varieties of it with gorillas and with chimpanzees, who are our immediate. We emerged out of all that. But soon we were no longer small bands, no longer living off what nature spontaneously provides, a new life form. And those societies existed. Well, I won't go there yet. There's in answer to your question that you've raised so far, I'm sort of fixated on the destructive forces that resulted from
Sure.
stepping out of an order. The disorder that we stepped into has had very difficult ramifications that we're still dealing with.
Yes.
And I think we've talked about a little of that.
Mm-hmm.
But the most immediate thing is we are a creature that has developed the ability for culture. We have this creative intelligence which is open-ended possibilities for coming up with new ideas and new technologies and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
With culture, we have the ability to transmit all that knowledge that we keep coming up with from generation to generation. So we become cumulatively more and more powerful as a human civilization, as a part of the system of life on Earth. And one of the outcomes of that, and there are many, like climate change and the possibility of a nuclear holocaust, which,
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm fixated on the destructive possibilities. But one of the outcomes of that is we control a huge amount of the resources of the world, and we're able to support a human population that has taken off since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, as we became more and more productive, and science took off and technology took off.
Mm. Well, one of the elements that I want to throw into the mix, and you talk about the destructive aspects that you're kind of focused on, that's your issue, in at least in terms of our civilization and whether or not it continues. And that is this. I'll add to the mix of what
I lost your sound.
try that one. There we go. And we're back, and we're talking with Andrew Schmookler. Andy, I wanna touch on this that I added. I'm going to add to what I've already said in reference to the biblical or the religious aspects.
Okay.
And it's this: in our modern day, there are those scientists, and maybe they're more theorists than anything else, that say that the planet really can't sustain 8 billion people or more.
Well, not the
And
way we're doing
I have
it
a hard
now.
time. Go ahead.
Not the way we're doing it now. I mean, I don't know. People have had different ideas about what the carrying capacity of the Earth is.
Right.
But you know, we have breakthroughs. But you know, population is one of the issues for getting civilization under control.
Okay.
You know,
So, but
go ahead.
what that tells us with people who have a problem or have issue or have done whatever calculations they've come up with to say that 8 billion is not sustainable on this planet, which again I find difficult to accept, considering the area of land that we have available. But then, of course, this goes into another realm of the resources issue. But there are those who are into the conspiracy theories who believe that the quote unquote powers that be, and I grew up in this business in broadcasting at a Christian station for 15 years, where I was hearing about a lot of this stuff, and the New World Order and the Trilateral Commission and the Illuminati and on and on and on and all of that stuff, right?
Do we have to enter into that?
No. All I'm saying,
realm of
no.
Of almost okay. Go ahead.
all I'm saying is that there are those who believe conspiratorially that there is a conspiracy to cull the population. And of course, we have movies that come out, you know, The Purge.
Why would we? Why you tell me this? Why do we want to talk about that?
Well,
I mean,
I'm only getting to the point.
I think we need to put out, and I'm happy to do that.
Well,
how we're supposed to look at this.
Sure.
I mean, I understand that there are people all over the planet who have sort of weird ways of sort of trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
But who don't have a clue.
Right.
And I'm not, you know,
but
I'm compassionate with that.
Right.
But I don't know if I want to give a lot of time to talking about that.
And I'm not going to give any more time to it, other than to say this: that if in fact that were the case, that's just one way of minimizing. My theory is this, setting aside all of the conspiracies and everything, that how many more people do we really need to do the things that we're doing? I mean, and I've even put this theoretical question, more philosophical, Andy. I've often asked the question, does man really deserve to continue the way he treats his fellow man, let alone nature and the planet?
Well, here's how I want to suggest. I say I think we need to look at it from the right point of view.
All right, let's hear that.
What I'm indicating about the consequences of stepping onto the path of civilization, that it unleashes a destructive force, that we should have compassion for ourselves.
Okay.
Because we stepped into something that we didn't choose to be in an anarchic situation, but it is an inevitable part of what happens when you step out of order, is that you go into disorder, and disorder is a war of all against all. The anarchy is there's no way, no matter what human beings had been like inherently. So I think we deserve as good a world as we can create.
Hear, hear.
But right now, and since the beginning, the evolution of civilization has been out of control. That's the thing that's most important to know. Now, these people with this conspiracy theories, they want to think, they naturally think that everything has to be designed by somebody, whether it's God's plan or whether it's the Illuminati or somebody, or the elders of Zion. Somebody's got to be running this thing. But fundamentally, the problem has been that because we are that creature that had the creative intelligence to plunge ourselves into anarchy, we have been in a situation where things have been out of control. Nobody chose. When I was born, there were 2-point-something billion people in the world. I mean, and I'm not ancient.
No.
I'm post World War II, at least. But nobody was choosing that we would be at 8 billion now.
Right.
I mean, I'm just using that as an example of something much bigger about we don't control this thing yet. And my mission in life is to show people the forces that we don't control and why we are not in control of them, and get us to focus on, okay, how do we bring those forces under control? I mean, for example, may I continue, or do you want to jump in?
All I want to jump in and say, ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Tell Me Your Story. We're talking with Dr. Andrew Schmookler, who is an award-winning author, former Democratic nominee for Congress in Virginia, and a columnist. And we are talking, of course, as you're hearing, about where are we going to go as a civilization as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan with Andrew Schmookler, and I'm going to let him continue with what he is sharing with us in regards to this whole aspect of, in a manner of speaking, the continuation. You used a word, though, just a moment ago to describe the population and our. We didn't choose this, and I'm going to give you that one on this at this particular point, that we didn't, quote unquote, choose to reach 8 billion and have the chaos. And
we
so
didn't.
forth.
I was born in 46. We'd just been through World War II.
Right.
Now, if humankind had been given a choice at that point, or in the wake of that, in 2022, would the world be a place where there might be a somewhat crazy, somewhat paranoid, power-hungry gangster, a fascist dictator in control of a nuclear superpower?
Yeah.
Who could single-handedly take the world from a place where peace is sort of growing and plunge the world into a war footing, which has economic implications, that has geopolitical implications, that change a peaceful Europe into one which is again mobilized out of fear of a conqueror? Would that people have chosen that in 2022 we'd be in a situation where one crazy guy with a nuclear arsenal could be brandishing his nukes and threatening subtly nuclear war to intimidate people who might stand against him? Oh, no, we didn't choose that. It's out of control. We haven't brought it under control yet. We haven't created a world system in which it is impossible for somebody like that to get into a position of absolute control of a nuclear power. The question we have to ask ourselves is, well, what would a world have to look like not to be vulnerable to such an outcome?
Right.
And likewise, would the people since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution want to be in a choose to be in a situation where almost 5 decades since the climate scientists started telling the world that we have a significant problem, that what we're doing on this planet in terms of our economic activities is transforming the atmosphere. And the transformation of the atmosphere, adding carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, is changing the climate system of the world.
Yeah.
And the disruption of the climate system is threatening, and there's a whole variety of very serious things that it
Yeah.
threatens.
Mm-hmm.
Just migrations and out of droughts and famines and wars and all kinds of things. We really don't need that kind of disruption. Would people back then have wanted for us to do so little as we have to bring that under control?
Mm.
And then you look at all the reasons that we haven't brought it under control, including a fossil fuel industry that knew the truth, but embarked upon a propaganda campaign to convince enough people that it's a hoax, that they could immobilize the political system from taking the kind of action that any moral system would say we were absolutely obliged to take. If we even care about our grandchildren, we would certainly be doing more than we've done since the truth became known. And it's only become more known.
Yeah.
So it's out of control. We've got systems that generate fossil fuel industries that are willing for their own greed to sacrifice practically the whole planet in some ways. We've got a system in which power is working on our planet so that one crazy leader might trigger a planet-ending nuclear holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
It's out of control.
Yeah.
We got to figure out, how did it get this way? What do we got to bring under control? What is the mechanism of building a world that can survive? And I think it's just a toss-up whether human civilization in the next couple centuries will get its act together or will destroy itself, and maybe much of the planet with it.
We're talking with Andrew Schmookler, and you are listening to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is really a pleasure to have Andy with us again here on the program. These conversations are fascinating. You make the comment, and you've said this several times throughout the portion of this particular program, that we didn't choose this. There's an interesting, I don't know if you call it a saying or whatever you want to call it, but maybe it's a theory in a manner of speaking, where it says that the choices that we are where we are today because of all of the choices that we have made in the past, and that we will be wherever we are, wherever we are going to be in the future is going to be based upon the choices that we make today. But I love I'll call it the addendum to that whole thing that says that the choices that you make, that I make today, is based upon our perception of what we think our future will be. So I'm wondering how that plays into this mix. Certainly you and I as individuals, I'm an optimist. I'm a glass half full kind of guy. Okay. I'm of the opinion, the belief, it's not based on anything other than my belief, that we're going to be okay. We're going to figure this out. We're smart enough. The question is, will we use those smarts to do these things? I mean, look at when we've had various natural disasters in particular, and we adapt, and we come together, and we help one another. That is part of human nature, to be there. Yes, there's the other aspects of it too. So I'm just wondering about that element of the perception of what our population, maybe at large, that some would call it a collective consciousness, in the realms of what you're talking about here, of the future of our civilization. If more of us think that it's going to be better, that we're going to work towards that goal. That's what these programs are about, is bringing these ideas forward. What are your thoughts in that regard?
We're not in any position really to assess the probabilities. I say my gut feeling is that it's a toss-up whether we'll be okay or not.
Okay.
I think that our religions teach us that hope is preferable to despair.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I like that that you think we're going to be okay, particularly, or anybody thinks that will, particularly if they think it in a way which motivates them
Mm-hmm.
to put their shoulder to the wheel to see that we get through this dangerous process that we're still engaged in.
Yeah.
And when I say dangerous and that we do not choose, let me say a few things. One is that the second piece in my series is entitled "The Ugliness We See in Human History is Not Human Nature Writ Large." And it also, what I try to show in that essay also says that any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, that takes the step that we took 10 or 12,000 years ago towards civilization would inevitably have to recapitulate or to go through a social evolutionary process as tormented and destructive as the one that we see in the pages of human history. It is a function of leaving the natural order that a force gets unleashed, and that's what I try to show, a force that drives how that creature's civilization will develop. So yeah, we make choices.
Mm-hmm.
People are, but there are a lot of people who have difficulty thinking about the reality of systemic forces.
Mm-hmm.
That in some ways the whole is not to be understood in terms of the sum of its parts, that the whole has properties of its own. And I had the experience, that ugliness. That's a restatement of my first book, which is called "The Parable of the Tribes."
Mm-hmm.
And I had a conversation with a famous man who was a Pulitzer Prize winning biographer and a Harvard psychiatrist at the medical school, a brilliant guy who read my book, which is all about how social evolutionary forces beyond our control that we unwittingly unleashed
Mm-hmm.
had driven how the course that much of how civilization has developed. And one of the ways I put that is that the spirit of the gangster has had an disproportionate say in how our civilizations would be organized and how they would unfold. And I think I prove it. I mean, I've had this idea for, it's going to be pretty soon, 53 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've gone through it many, many times, and I was trained to think critically. It holds water. If anybody wants to know, if would want to know if that were true, if it were, they would want to see the idea so they could absorb it. Please go to that piece. I lay it out pretty briefly. I've been laying it out for enough years that I did my very best. So please go there. Anyway, this book shows that there are systemic forces, that it's not what we see in history of all these tyrants and bullies and enslavements and tyrannies and war and violence and all that ugliness that we see wherever civilization, whether it was the pharaohs or the tyrants of Mesopotamia or the kings of China, the Indus Valley, or here in the New World, everywhere we see it, it's the same ugly face.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the face of our nature. We are better creatures than that. That's the good news. The bad news is we haven't been able to control this thing.
Right.
And anyway, so I showed that in the book. I wrote the first chapter 9 times because I wanted it to be crystal clear how it worked. And this brilliant guy starts talking to me about it. He really liked the book and all that. But then he starts talking as if the place to understand what's happened is to look at the aggressiveness in human nature. He's reduced it again back to it's the creature. If history is made by all kinds of people making choices, then it must be about us. No, I think I proved that whatever we were like, assuming that we had the capacity, for cultural animals, that means our societies can mold us. The baby is not born with a language and a culture and a way of, every hunting gathering band for whatever it is of Homo sapiens, 300,000 years, each had its own culture. Every baby is born ready to learn. Because we are cultural creatures, we fell into civilization with a great deal of plasticity, and we could become whatever civilization needed us to become. Well, almost whatever, because there are things that we wanted by nature to be. So we end up very broken creatures. So, yeah, we make choices, but we didn't choose to be subject to a world in which the spirit of the gangster is having such a powerful impact. We didn't choose that, and we end up injured and broken because of that. And we aren't going to be able to make ourselves whole unless we make the world more whole. And we aren't going to be able to make the world more whole unless we become more whole, including in our understanding of what we're up against.
We're talking with Andrew Schmookler here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, and I'm your host for this program as we talk more with Andrew Schmookler. He is Dr. Andrew Schmookler, award-winning author, former candidate for Congress in Virginia, columnist these days. And of course, a lot of the things that we're talking about here, how the meaning of the news, national and global, can be better understood in terms of the large forces at work. That's what you've been just sharing with us. But he's also talking about a better human story, which focuses on enabling humankind to better understand the forces at work that have driven the story of humankind on this planet. Okay, so you say that these, I'll use your term, gangster forces, if you will, they are not part of our human nature. Did I understand you to say that correctly?
Well, in so many words. I mean,
okay.
we can be made into most anything.
Okay.
And in a broken world, the gangster structure is it will naturally emerge some. And in a world where the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must, in a world where it is those who can prevail in the war of all against all who get control, we're going to become a place like Russia. I mean, look at Russia. My ancestors came from the Tsarist ruled areas. The music of Russia is wonderful. The literature of Russia is wonderful. And yet, look at the way it is organized now as a society. None of that wonderfulness is prevailing.
Yeah.
What is prevailing is the spirit of the gangster. And that's sort of an ugly particular of what the evolution of civilization has had in various ways throughout, to a much greater degree than we humans ever would have chosen. It has been out of control.
Okay.
Civilization inevitably plunges any creature that steps there into a situation where it is out of control, and it's challenged to bring it under control before it destroys itself.
All right. So the question that I have for you now is, if that aspect is not truly part of our human nature, okay, as you've described it, where's it come from?
Oh, it is part of our human potential. In other words, you can make people into the kinds of people who torture or who think to round up people and send them to concentration camps. You can create people like that. But like, what is human nature? Are you familiar with a psychologist in the 50s Harlow did famous experiments with rhesus monkeys?
No, I'm not. Tell us.
Well, I don't think he'd be allowed to do the research he did then because it's cruel.
Yeah.
he took these rhesus babies and he divided them into two groups. He took them away from their mothers. These are, like human babies, and emotionally they seem that way. He took them away from their mother. And one group that had, as a so-called mother, it had a wire cage of some kind. I don't remember what it looked like, but it wasn't at all comforting, is the point. And the other group didn't have a real mother, but at least it was covered with, like carpeting or something. They could cuddle up against it and get comfort. And then he watched how they grew up. And the ones that didn't have any comforting couldn't function at all as the rhesus monkeys they were. They couldn't mate. They couldn't interact with successfully with other rhesus monkeys. The other ones, even if they hadn't had just a certain amount of comfort, enabled them to become more or less normal rhesus monkeys. So the question is, well, what's the nature of a rhesus monkey? And the answer is, well, it depends on what kind of experience they're born into. And the thing about and the answer I would give is the nature of the rhesus monkey is what they would be like if they were born into the situation that evolution has crafted them to expect.
So,
all over, rhesus monkeys get born in the jungle, and they got mothers, and they're part of a group, and they become rhesus monkeys. Now, we humans are born into something which is being shaped by forces other than our needs too, but other than our needs. And that's what I think I show. And there's a lot of wire cageness about what is being favored by the process of selection, where you've got a war of all against all, and only the strong, the ones that win wars of all against all, they're not necessarily the best. We can see what happens with anarchy. Warlords. In Lebanon in the late 70s and early 80s, there was anarchy, and warlords became the lords of the country. Somalia fell apart. It became anarchic in the 1990s. You may remember Black Hawk Down and all that.
Oh, yeah.
What emerged again was the warlord. Well, anarchy is the inevitable initial condition of a system embracing human societies, civilized societies that are within reach of each other. And warlords will come to the fore. Now, that is not a function of our being born into a system into which we evolve biologically. We are getting a war of all against all. We are living in societies where the majority of people are made into mere property to serve the tyrant. These are not what we expected when we became human. We are not going to be the same living in such a world. We will have our problems like those rhesus monkeys. So no, that tyranny out there, it's not like it's not human. It's just a non-random aspect of humanity that's a function of of a system that we have not controlled.
So it sounds like what you're kind of saying here, maybe not you're saying that we are a product of our environment, and it's not totality in that regard.
Well, first, we're a product of our environment in that for 3.5 billion years, life evolved, and the mammals branched off a couple 100 million years ago, and then after another 130 million years, the primates branch off, or something like that. And then out of that, it's getting more and more complicated, but eventually. What we were crafted was by an evolutionary process. That our environment, how do we survive in this environment? The things that worked, that got DNA into the future in that environment are what we became.
Right. Right.
We got, and one thing is that we got smarter and smarter because in that environment, we were finding ways of making that work out well for us.
Sure.
We
By the
didn't
same token,
anticipate.
yeah, but by
Yeah,
the same token, when you say we got smarter and smarter, well, in certain areas we got smarter and smarter, but in other
yeah,
areas we did not evolve intellectually because of where we are today. And
that's
as you
that.
describe it, it's a toss-up. It's a 50-50 proposition as to whether or not civilization is going to survive and continue for another 100, 200, 300, 1,000 years.
I would guess. I don't, I've never said this or even thought this before, but I would guess that if you were to somehow be able to evaluate the hunter-gatherer peoples, the last from before civilization, from 40,000 years ago,
Right, yeah.
when we were dealing with the Neanderthals who were still around at that time. It's a very interesting field, by the way. Uh,
Yeah.
I would guess that if you were to go to those groups and sort of evaluate people for their brokenness, like how screwed up are they,
Yeah.
and evaluate them also for, and this is really where I was going to go. This was the original idea. Wisdom. I don't know if this is true, but I'm guessing that if you had a community of 30 people, maybe 20 of them are adults, you'd be more likely to find more wisdom per capita. I wonder if that's true. I mean, like I said, I never thought it before, but why would that be if it were true?
Yeah.
And I think what it is that we have a challenge. Human beings have a challenge.
Mhm.
We are born with a particular nature that was crafted through evolution of a biological sort.
Right.
And now we're having to adjust to and live in a system, a civilization, which is our main environment, that has been molded by a different evolutionary process, which was not driven by our nature, but driven by the selection for power, is one of my key phrases. The
I guess,
ways of power.
yeah.
So we're I think more challenged and more likely to be injured and less likely to be sort of in touch with the core
Hmm.
than people who don't have all that challenge, who are born into the situation for which they had been crafted.
Yeah.
That's what my thought is.
I guess another question I've got for you in that regard, and I think that's rather fascinating, the thought there. What is wisdom versus intuition versus intellectual capacity? I list three things there. So
Well,
what is wisdom and where does it reside?
well, it resides in the minds, hearts, and spirits of some human beings. I love the question because on my maternal side, wisdom was the most winning of suits. Uh, my grandmother, who died before I was born, the stories of her, she was uneducated, but she was a wise woman, that kind of thing. And I've always gravitated toward figures of the wise person. Um, Obi-Wan Kenobi in the Star Wars movie.
Yes, yes.
Wisdom, I think is, well, another thing in our culture, there was at least the idea that there's information, there's knowledge, and there's wisdom, and it's got to do with integrating things.
Hmm.
Mere data is all the pieces.
Hmm.
Wisdom is at the other end of the spectrum. It's having integrated all the information and finding out what it means,
Right.
what makes it work. You go to a wise person for advice because they know how things play out.
Yeah.
They know how the world operates.
Yeah.
They see, Obi-Wan there, he says, I feel a disturbance in the force. He's tuned in to the force.
Yeah.
And I think wisdom is also, like Aesop's fables, which I loved as a kid and still
Oh,
love.
yes. Yes.
The story of the little boy that cried wolf.
Hmm.
It's supposed to be a lesson for all those people who would want to deceive and manipulate and exploit people. It'll come back and bite you in the ass.
Yes, it will. Now, that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Because it's interesting that you bring up that term and describe it in such a way, because I've always considered my father to be a very wise individual from the standpoint
Good for you.
Of the lessons that he taught me, the things that he would say to me. A couple of them are eat, drink, and be merry in moderation, because nobody gets out of this world alive.
Did he walk that talk?
I believe that he did, because
He's reached the 90s. That's
he's
that's an
91.
indication.
He also told me, he says, Richard, don't get stuck. Find something you love doing, because you're going to be doing it for a long time. Don't get stuck like me. Now, I think he told me that long before. Now, he was working at that time, I think, in a print shop, and took me on a tour, and it was lots of memories that I have. And then they wanted to move the print shop, the company did, to Utah. My father did not want to uproot the family, so he obviously had to come up with something else. And so he went back to school, went to college, and got his computer programming degree. Now, this was back in the 70s, punch cards and fanfold paper. And then he continued his career in computer programming. He's always loved computers since then. And he and I,
something he did not. Is that not something he loved? Is that
well, they didn't exist. I mean, the closest that we had back then was one of those Texas Instruments slide rules that cost like $500 then.
But I'm going back to what he said to you about don't get stuck like I did.
Yeah, but see, that was before he went to school.
Oh, I see. He unstuck himself.
He unstuck himself, exactly.
Oh, okay, I didn't get that.
Now, here's the interesting situation that I find myself in. And now, I have not changed my opinion of my father. Now, he does not like being referred to as a wise man. He absolutely abhors it because he doesn't like it. But
so I want to be referred to as a wise man.
Right. But he is 91. He'll be 92 in August, and I say if he makes it, because he has been diagnosed with a couple of conditions that have laid him up. He can't do anything. He's actually going to start receiving hospice care and so forth. And yet my mother, I talked with my mother just recently, and the tone in her voice was of a very strong, determined, committed woman. My mother's 89. She'll be 89 this year. And she made the comment to me. She says, we can't afford to put dad in your father into a nursing home. And I don't really want to. And I can understand that. And fortunately, the hospice there's no charge for hospice care, but she also has a caregiver coming in. She and he both have Medicare, obviously, so there's going to be coverage there.
It's a difficult situation.
I have three sisters. Now, I lost my fourth sister, my eldest sister, almost a year ago, as of our conversation, March of 2022. And I do believe that my father has never really reconciled that. It was his eldest daughter, his first child.
So you think that has hastened his end?
I think so. And what's really strange for me is I've known people. Now this sort of goes to the wisdom that he has imparted to me, both verbally but also genetically through the DNA, if you will. When my sister passed, yes, I was a little shocked, because when the phone rang and my younger sister said, Richard, I have some bad news, I thought she was going to tell me that dad had passed away. And it was my eldest sister. I was a little shocked, only because of what I was expecting. And the only time that I shed tears, and we all grieve differently, was at her memorial a month later. And as I say often, and I say this every time, it was the most beautiful balance between, or mixture between, laughter and tears that the entire audience that was there, both on Zoom as well as in the church. But the point I'm getting to is
Yeah,
this.
what is the issue that the current situation is bringing up for you? If I
It's
may
that
guide you that way.
my father now, and again, I don't, matter of fact, I was asking myself this question, Dad, what's going on inside for you right now? What's happening with you? You
Did
know?
you ask him that question,
No,
or you
no,
just thought of it?
he lives in Phoenix. I'm here in Santa Barbara, and right now I don't think that he can really take phone calls. He's lucid from time to time.
Oh, I see.
But it's like you taught us all to be very, very not only independent, but also interdependent. We're a family, we're connected, we're committed to with one another. These experiences are only making us stronger as a family, even as the family is shrinking. But it's like through these interviews, for example, and talking about these subjects, and I've said this is my therapy, my understanding, as limited as it might be, maybe it's more belief or philosophic, is that, for example, my sister was in a body, now she's everywhere. Okay? Because she's no longer confined. My father, um, again, I don't know what's going on in his mind and in his heart because he's really not that communicative. And I think that those kinds of questions might be maybe a little too much
Are
for
you
him right now.
afraid that he's suffering from fear
No, I'm not afraid. I'm concerned,
no, I
certainly.
mean, are you
Yeah,
afraid that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
he may be afraid?
He may be afraid, sure. He may very well be. And he has, to his credit, as well as to his right, he has sort of kept his inner life, his personal spiritual life, private. It's not that if one would ask him, he said, "No, I don't talk about that." It wasn't so much that. It's more he just didn't share. Now I myself, I'm sharing all the time.
Yeah, well,
It's very
that's very
interesting.
it is interesting, but I gather you've even though you would have liked to have been more included in his inner landscape
Sure.
at some of these levels, that his being imparted. You, he lived his beliefs. He
Absolutely.
was a man of integrity, so
Yes.
you could absorb it, as it were,
Yeah.
through the skin.
Hmm.
Uh,
And
his wisdom.
yeah. And what that raises for me is the same aspect that as you've, I think, quite well elucidated to my father's contribution to my life. My father also told me in so many words that he did not believe that he really had much of an influence on our upbringing, that it was my mother because he was at work 9 to 5. And I just sit here going, you got to be kidding. First of all, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Okay. Your seed.
Did you tell him that
Oh,
he was
yes. Oh,
wrong?
absolutely. As a matter of
Did he
fact,
buy it?
I don't know whether he bought it or not because I told him,
Is this false modesty or on his part, or is he unaware of how important he was?
I think it's he's unaware. He had
Uh,
six kids. And I have written a song for him, which one of these days I'll debut on this program. But some of the things that well, the chorus line basically goes like this: "Oh, Daddy, you know how much I love you. Oh, Daddy, you know I know how much you care. Oh, Daddy, I would not be half the man I am. Oh, Daddy, if you had not been there." And I
well,
said those words to him directly. We were on the phone talking. And I told him that. I said, Dad, I wouldn't be half the man I am today if it weren't for you.
I think it's wonderful. It's wonderful that you're saying things like that to him, because one of the things that one has to deal with, as
Mm-hmm.
you probably know well,
Yeah.
is that it is much better for those who survive if the relationship feels complete, than if there are things important that were left unsaid or unasked. So you're saying that to him is it's a gift that you will be able to give yourself
Yeah.
for the rest of your life.
Yeah. Well, now the other interesting aspect too is that in talking with my mother just the other day, and again, I am just I am amazed, but also acknowledge her contribution both environmentally, okay, through her bringing us up, but also through her DNA, if you will, the biology, how strong a woman she is, and so forth. And I told her in so many words that um, Dad and I were good. We've never been estranged. I should say that there's never been a divide between us.
That's a wonderful thing to be able to
Yeah,
report too, isn't it?
yeah. And I said that there's nothing I'm ever going to regret not having said to him because I've already said it to him. And this was not only a year ago. We had a little incident where my brother loves to tell jokes. Okay, I am not the one to be telling jokes in the family, not because I tell bad jokes, but because they don't go over as well as when he tells them, because everybody knows he's being sarcastic. So I come home back to their condo. This is when my sister's memorial. My brother and I had left in the same car, but he did not return. And my father was concerned and come up to the group that was talking and said, "Where's your brother? Where's Mike? Where's Mike?" To which I jokingly said, "Dad, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we had to sell Mike to put gas in the car." Oh, he was mad. I mean, look, when I ask a question, I want an answer. Well, now here's what's interesting. This is why I know my father and I are good. A few hours later, I'm making up the bed on the couch in the living room. He comes walking in and he apologizes. And I put my hands on his shoulders and I said, "Dad, I love you and you will always be my father and we are good." And we hugged. And the reason I bring all of this up is to ask the question in regards to your position that it's a toss-up. Do you believe that these kinds of interactions of an honest and humble nature between fellow human beings on the planet is one of the ways that we are going to change the potential direction of destruction away from that to
Well,
the potential
I understand.
creation?
I understand the question,
Yeah,
and in a sense, there are two sides to the answer.
sure.
One is that there is a wholeness about the human world. And if you look at all the ways in which it gets broken, you will see that what happens in families and what happens across international boundaries are not disconnected.
Right.
From the global to the personal, it's all, if you were to make all the connections between causes and effects, it would be such a dense web. It would be so everything that makes things more whole fortifies the force of wholeness, including what the hug between you and your father. It's just one more little piece of positive valence that exists in the world among trillions of such interactions that are positive or negative between people. And then it connects with how people get molded. Everything connects with everything. So everything is relevant to healing the world. On the other hand, there are particular places where the rubber is hitting the road more than others.
Yeah.
Like if we're concerned about nuclear holocaust as one of the ways we could blow it, then a particular amount of attention has to be paid on how do we in the coming generations create a world where we don't face something like, will the United States and China get into a nuclear war over Taiwan, which is a genuine question
Sure.
that needs to be asked in the world that we're living in right now,
Mhm.
even beside the Ukraine situation.
Yeah.
So we got to pay attention to that, because the whole game can hinge on whether we get an answer to that in time. Likewise, we have to ask, well, how do we, what do we have to do so that something like our destroying the biosphere that we depend on for our survival isn't one of the possible ways that we're going to conduct ourselves, like it has been in bringing about climate change, disruption. We have to pay attention to that. In America these days, we also have to ask, how did it come to be that a force of fascism was able to take over one of America's two major political parties and threaten the survival of American democracy, which on the whole has been one of humanity's better things for moving the world in the right direction, for all the mistakes that we made. A lot better than Hitler's Germany or the Empire of Japan back in the World War II. We know who was wearing the white hat in that. And better than Stalin's Russia, too.
Yeah.
Imperfect, but still, the leader of the free world meant something. Why is it that we have a political force in America? How did it come to be that something that would have been absolutely unthinkable in Eisenhower's America, or even the America of the first George Bush, has come into being in the United States over the course of the last 30 years? And those things need a special attention. So, you're working your family into being as whole as possible in spite of the losses. Is doing God's work. Using the phrase figuratively in my case. And also, we got to keep our eyes on the big picture.
What is the big picture?
Well, that's what I've been trying to present here the whole damn time. I said I was a man on a mission, and the reason is, talk about old age. I'm going to be 77 pretty soon, and I realize that the road isn't going to go on forever. And I have this feeling that people can dismiss this, but I have been convinced of this since a particular piece of things about the big picture came to me in 1970, and now I've built a bunch of things around it, which people can find on my website, that could have a beneficial effect on whether we're able to get our act together. I think that if we recognize that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be, we will become better able to create the world we need to create. And I believe that the forces that I identify and use to explain what we're up against, I think if more people could see it that way, more people could fight effectively to see to it that we make the choice toward life and not toward death in the generations to come. And it's because I think, though some of what I've written is way out there in the world, got a full page, but a lot of it isn't. And if I died tonight, I think a lot would be lost. So that's the mission. Get people to take a look at this thing, because we need to understand the nature of the challenge we face as a species. It was in the cards as soon as we started becoming civilized. It was in the cards for any creature that does that. We have to order our civilization well enough and soon enough to survive, so our civilization can survive for the long haul rather than destroy itself. That's the challenge, and I feel on a mission to get people to see that challenge, because if we see it clearly, we'll do a whole lot better at meeting that challenge.
We're talking with Andrew Schmookler, Dr. Andrew Schmookler, and a betterhumanstory.org is one of the websites. Certainly he's connected, and we'll be linked to that website in particular so that you folks can read more about the work that he is doing here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and Dr. Andrew Schmookler, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts in regards to those who are out there who they believe that the one of the best ways to help bring about a more constructive future for humanity is to raise the consciousness, whatever that means to you. And it actually goes back to what Einstein said, that you cannot solve the challenges or the problems with the same consciousness that created it, i.e., your example of this whole political situation, where it's kind of summed up this way: how did we go from Barack Obama to this other guy? That's kind of how it's summed up from a political standpoint. But what do you think about people who say we just need to raise the consciousness of the planet one person at a time? Do you have any idea what that means? And if you do or don't, what are your thoughts?
Well, you know, the human consciousness has more than one dimension to it. My stock and trade is in terms of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
It's truth telling. It's got to do with identifying the forces in it. I was trained in a way to be a thinker more than anything else. You know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. If it's bridge, I open up my hand, and the way I was brought up by my dad, who was a brilliant man and an economist and a social thinker and a historian. You know, that's my strong suit. But
Mm-hmm.
and so my the main part of what my message is in terms of showing the truth of things. But that's and I think, you know, that mission I'm talking about, it has other dimensions too, like moral and spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that human consciousness isn't just about that.
Mm-hmm.
There's also in our humanity a passion for good to defeat evil, or some such way of apprehending things.
Mm-hmm.
We have a feeling about ideals, about how we want the world to be, that peace is better than war and love is better than hate, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Judgments of that sort, I think, are part of human consciousness. And I think it's important to raise all of those. We haven't talked about the reasons why we're so threatened in America right now, but part of it is that the side that had to defend the good was so clueless about what was being what the nature of the battle was. You know, to put it boldly, the Democratic Party didn't have a clue what was rising on the right.
You know, that's what's
So
interesting. You say that it's interesting because the more that whole situation evolved during in 2015 and 16, I'm sitting here going, they're just letting this monster grow. This is all on them.
I started with this in the early 1990s when I saw
Yeah.
it rising, and then in 2004 with the W presidency, you know, John Dean from Watergate infame, you know, became a good guy, and he wrote a book that was worse than Watergate. So it was rising back then.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway,
Go
so
ahead.
there's a moral dimension to consciousness, and that has to be raised. People have to
Mm.
become passionate about the nature of the battle, just like when they go see Star Wars or Avatar or Lord of
Mm-hmm.
the Rings, people get passionate. Well, that is a battle that is actually going on in our world. It's just it's a little more subtle, but not much anymore.
Yeah.
It was subtle back when Rush Limbaugh started poisoning people's minds,
Yeah.
but it's not subtle anymore.
No,
So,
no.
and then there's the spiritual dimension, which I think is also important. People have spiritual experiences. A good portion of people have experiences that they feel take them to a deeper, more alive, more vivid, more true level.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's simply a fact. I mean, however you interpret that, it is a part of the human genome. Wherever you look, there are going to be people who are having these experiences, and
Right.
they have certain characteristics. And one of them is that they're powerful. Now, if people are very broken, that brokenness and that spiritual power can be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
But if people can be whole in other ways, the spiritual level is one of the ways of making us more powerful in the world, in the fight for life against death,
Have
for
you?
peace against war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you ever had any supernatural or spiritual experiences of your own?
Yeah, I have. Should I say more?
Please.
you know, I say I was trained to be a thinker, and it's certainly true. But that idea that's sort of at the foundation of the integrative vision of the human story that I've built, that came to me in 1970, I actually had the experience that it was being shown to me. It was the only such moment in my 76 plus years. I mean, I've had other experiences too that, were deeply spiritually moving, and one other that I can't explain. But this was the only time when I felt like something was being shown to me about what had happened to the human species. And like I say, I've applied my training to it. I developed it. I wrote a 1,600-page dissertation starting immediately after getting that experience. But it wasn't me thinking, or at least that's how I experienced it. So I don't know how to explain that. That doesn't, my dad was a child of the Enlightenment, evidence and logic. But, one of the pieces of evidence is I had that experience, whatever it means. There was something that worked somehow to give me an experience in which I saw something that was true and important. And I made a promise to something that was showing it to me, though I didn't have a clue what it was. I said, I will do everything I can to convey this that you've shown me to my fellow human beings. Now, that feeling of having contacted something stayed with me for 2 or 3 years. And then, I remember it, but, time goes by, my habits resume, but I do think there is a spiritual dimension that is part of our nature that has been selected for by evolution, that we have that capacity. And that wouldn't happen if it didn't serve life. In other words, we wouldn't have human beings all over the world in almost every community having contact with things like this that change the course of life. My life has been on a completely different path since that moment. It changed the course of my life. We wouldn't have that in us unless those people whose DNA made that capacity exist didn't do a better job of surviving into the future than the people who didn't. I mean, some of our ancestors, if you go back far enough, I think we can assume that, when you go back to when the dinosaurs got blown off the planet, we weren't, our ancestors were not having experiences of the spiritual nature that people report. So someplace it emerged. And I'm guessing, I don't know, do elephants have these experiences? I don't know. But anyway, we do. And it wouldn't have been selected for unless the people, the organisms that had it passed their DNA more successfully into the future than the ones that didn't, which means it's life-serving, which means we got to listen to that voice. So yeah, we should raise consciousness. We should cultivate an openness to that level, make ourselves as whole as possible so that when we get whatever it is that we get at that level, it really is uncontaminated by our brokenness and makes us good servants of what will serve life in the generations to come and help make us, let's raise consciousness spiritually, morally, and intellectually.
I love that. I absolutely love that. It's along the lines of the experiences that I've had in talking with people of very, very almost concreted, if not solidified, belief systems, who then turn right around and they're sharing with me that, oh, well, yeah, but I also do this. I interviewed a born again, Bible believing, fundamentalist Christian who actually induces, and this is his experience, out of body experiences. He leaves his body intentionally. And I thought, and of course, we talked about it. He shared his experience. And I said, okay, but let me ask you, where in the good book does it say that you're supposed to or even can do that? He says, nowhere. And it's those kinds of people and those kinds of stepping out of that box, those 9 dots, that gives me hope for the future of humanity, because
Yeah.
there are people who, regardless of what they say they believe, and maybe they've believed it for decades, they are choosing to have these experiences. And when they have, like what you've described, a certain experience that is not explainable in the book, I would never, ever dismiss it. I would accept it as the truth because it's their experience. Who am I to tell them they didn't have that experience?
Well,
And
there's the experience, and then there's the interpretation of experience.
right, but the interpretation is by others, not by.
I think one has to interpret it for oneself.
Yes,
Also,
exactly.
I mean, I imagine that if we talk with your friend, I mean, I don't know what his out of body experiences are like.
Yeah.
What I mean, I'm hoping that there's some meaningful substance to it. It
Sure.
isn't just like, oh wow, I'm having a weird,
Yeah.
I'm hoping that when he leaves his body, he gets to someplace worth going. But
Yeah. Well, I even asked him, I says, have you ever wanted not to come back? He says, oh, no, 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 no. That's not, it's just.
what does he get that when he goes
I think
someplace
that
else? What does he get?
I think that it's a sense and an awareness, if I'm remembering correctly, of his connection to, in his terms, to God, to the
Well,
Creator.
that is a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that doesn't say that he knows. It's kind of like I was in this play last Christmas, and one of the characters is out there, and he was trying to be brought back to life, and so forth. And he raises up. He's laying on the stage, and he sits up, and he says, "I know the meaning of life," and he falls back dead.
I wanted an idea came to me.
Yes.
If you, I thought of the question I'd want to ask your friend.
Yeah, sure.
Now here's what I'm thinking. Now he's having these experiences, and they're meaningful. And he also has his belief system in the same mind that's having these experiences.
Right.
And his belief system is organized around, you say, fundamentalist Bible believing. So
right.
There will be an impetus for him, I assume, and I observe something similar for myself. Though for me, I'm trying to understand in my intellectual framework these weird experiences I've had. He's trying to understand his weird experiences in the biblical, not necessarily biblical, but
right.
Christian framework, of which the Bible is an important part, but it ain't the whole thing.
Right.
So I'm imagining that he says, okay, he's experiencing himself as being close to God, and this God is the same one, that he's encountered in the Bible. I don't know. I'd be interested to know. I mean, God has many faces in the Bible. I'd be interested to know. But anyway, the question I would ask him, and you might consider this, is these experiences you've had of connecting with God. What have you learned about God that makes your sense of God any more complete or any different from what it was before you were doing these experiences? In other words, I'd be interested in knowing, getting more of an idea of what it is he's contacting. I mean, if his God is, say, more compassionate than he was imagining before this, I would say he's contacting, well, there's something loving that he's contacting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would,
Um,
yeah, but
so
that's,
I'd be
yeah,
interested in what the difference is.
yeah. Well, if I can find his name and all of that stuff, it's been years since I talked with him. But again,
Oh,
it's
I see.
those kinds of folks who are doing those kinds of things, not necessarily out of body, but just they're choosing to accept the experiences that they're having. These, we'll call them supernatural. Uh, and they're choosing to accept them. And a lot of people won't share them because they don't want to be judged. They don't want other people to interpret it and make those kinds of assessments. But that's where I have been of the position that if you had some kind of an experience, I'm not going to undermine it. That's your experience. It's like I walked out and down the street and I'm sharing that with you. And you said, no, you didn't. I said, oh, well, yeah, but I did. Who am I to tell you you didn't have that experience? So I think that's a fascinating thing. Dr. Andrew Schmookler is my guest. We are just about out of time here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm talking with Dr. Andrew Schmookler. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. And Dr. Schmookler, I want to thank you so much. I always love these conversations. I know there's so many different ways that we can go and talk about these things. Your vision, if you will, or your thoughts about our future as a civilization, as a society at large on the planet. Um, I share the concern, absolutely, because I know you're concerned. You wouldn't be thinking about it, talking about it, writing all of the books that you have if you weren't concerned. And yet I think we sort of are on the same page in that, yeah, I'm going to do my part. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that it's less of a toss up. Maybe it's a little more 51-49 or what have you.
I
Yeah.
lost your sound again. No.
There we go. Don't know how that happened, but nonetheless, I am so glad that you have joined us, and I'm going to keep working my best to make it 51-49 and all of that kind of stuff. And we'll see. All we can do is wait and see what happens. That's all we can do is do our best, make the choices that we make from those levels, those three levels you talked about of consciousness, and all we can do is wait and see. That's all we can do. So, because there are no givens, So I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
We'll have you back. I know that there's so many different ways we can go with this, and we'll go with it as many ways as we have to. I think that we went a different direction this time, and I'm kind of glad we did. It was good for me. I really enjoyed it, and thank you again for being with us. And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. You're sitting there probably thinking, oh, but Richard, you didn't ask him the 3 questions that you ask every one of your guests. You're right, I haven't. Not yet, but I'm going to. And the answers you've given me in the past may be the same as this one, but we haven't talked since we started our 15th year, I believe. And I've added a new question. And I'll ask you these questions and we'll wrap things up. And again, thank you so much for being with us. Who is Andrew Schmookler?
A man on a mission.
What is your life's purpose?
To fulfill that mission.
And what was your best day?
Yeah, I remember that question.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, sure. The last 2 times I've referred to the party for my first book, where a mutual friend gave me a party, and my wife to be came to the party and walked her bicycle up toward me, and our eyes met, and the rest is history. But so I have a piece on my website called the Sacred Space of Lovers. Anyway, it's a blessing for me. It wasn't like that day was necessarily the most enjoyable day of my life, but the long-term dividends.
Yeah.
That's what I've said in the previous times. But today I'll say instead that it was a day in August in 1970 when a couple questions that had been plaguing me and had caused me to drop out of graduate school and to be wandering in the world. I don't mean literally. Well, there was some of that, yeah. But so that my grandmother, I feel very sad about this because she never saw me after I got my act back together. She said, Andy, I hope you're enjoying your way of life, by which she meant that she hadn't a clue how I could possibly throw away all the opportunities I'd been given with my Harvard education and all that, in which she could take pride, because she was frustrated because she never could go beyond the 8th grade, though she was a very smart woman who wanted to be a doctor. So I had interrupted my progress in life when I discovered the world was a very destructive place. And this was 1968.
Yeah.
When we could go into why that year was unusual for a lot of people and disturbing in many ways.
Yeah.
So I had asked, why is the world so destructive? And what can I do that makes sense with my life?
Yeah.
Because if the world is so out of joint, then just fitting into the world isn't a good idea.
Yeah.
So that moment in 1970, I got given the answer to the question, why is the world so destructive? And people can go to see the ugliness we see in human history, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I got an assignment.
Yep.
It has been a really challenging assignment. I mean, I could tell you the stories about, and I've hardly made a living.
We encourage you folks to go to abetterhumanstory.org. You will also find the link to 3quarksdaily.com. It's up in the upper left-hand corner. You can't miss it. We'll be linked to that former website, abetterhumanstory.org. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to Lal and Jeanette, I am listening.